The Last of Us Season 2 is here, and to celebrate it, I finally got The Last of Us Part 2 on PC, because I am a part of the Master Race. And after nearly 30 hours of playtime, I have to say something which will unfortunately be controversial. The game's not half bad. Listen, I've been a fan of The Last of Us for as long as I can remember. Hell, I don't even remember where I found out about the game. My earliest memory is getting the Game of the Year edition on Christmas. And since then, I've been following every speck of information about the game and its franchise since roughly 2014. I still remember when the only information about an adaptation was that Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones read a version of the script with a bunch of actors. Even in 2020, without a PS4, I watched Gamers Little Playground's playthrough of The Last of Us 2, because I couldn't afford the PS4. And yes, at the time, I was furious at the leaks from the plot. So much so that I refused to watch any videos that included Abby's gameplay section, because I hated the character. But that anger was soon replaced by curiosity, as I thought more and more about the story, and more of that story started to make sense to me. So I came to the conclusion: I'm going to wait until it's inevitably ported to PC. Wait to see if the port is any good. Try it and make my own decision on what I think of it. I won't listen to any YouTuber out there who makes a living being angry. I won't listen to any journalist who has to be positive or they lose their early access. I will play it to the end and make my own conclusion. So, technically, the game works quite well. I've had maybe 2 crashes in my entire playthrough, and the game only fell to unbearable frames during the most intense sections with the most amount of particle effects, namely the battle in Haven. Regardless, after finishing it, one thing that has become really apparent is just how much better the gameplay is overall. Not just in the relatively better melee system that should have been ported over in the remake and character controllers, but also in the level design. This is still a linear game through and through, but each combat arena is bigger, more expensive and denser, and offers dozens of ways to sneak through enemies or to kill them. Enemy behavior is just excellent. During a section with Abby, I was using a bit of cover to snipe enemies, and someone threw a pipe bomb at me, forcing me to run and expose myself. Before that, there was a section in the hospital with Ellie, where some WLF soldiers chased me into a basement with infected. I threw a bottle, bringing out the clickers, and I could visibly see all of the soldiers just trying to run away and hide and stay quiet, as one should do if attacked by clickers. I managed to prevent 2 of them from hiding and instead drew the clickers to them, and then I killed the clickers, and that's when the 3rd soldier popped up. One of them actually managed to hide. Naughty Dog tried to give the illusion that the rank and file goons you kill are real humans, and I can't really decide if that worked. One thing that goes in favor of that is the horrible shrieks and sounds they make when dying, which shook me sometimes. I also did not enjoy having to kill any of the dogs. But in my head, during most of these combat sections, I was kinda still cracking jokes while killing them and having a ton of fun. So hey, maybe I am a psycho. The changes made to the enemy AI makes the moment-to-moment combat more intense, visceral, while continuing to be fun. Sound effects are also great across the board. Looting remains enjoyable, primarily through the sound effects triggering the feel-good juices in my brain. The collectibles are a bit weird though. Ellie has the trading cards, while Abby has the coins. Some people might want to grab them. I was mostly disinterested in them, besides the one that's clearly Neil. I think it's primarily because these collectibles are mostly disconnected from the narrative. There is some dialogue from both characters, but it's mostly throwaway lines. And this leads us onto the story. Basically, the only reason that people buy these games. Now, I'm going to go right out and say it, so spoilers. I think the plot is good. I think the only way things could have gone forward was with Joel's death. I think Ellie hating Joel for most of their time in Jackson was inevitable. However, this story is not nearly as good as the first games, and it also does not hold a candle to other plots in the same medium or even others that talk about similar issues. The tragedy in the ending of the first game is that Joel's decision is one we would all make. Every one of us would sacrifice the world to save our child, and most likely right to their face if we knew that what they wanted was to sacrifice themselves. Such is the case with Ellie. After a year on the road with constant horror, Ellie needed the immunity to mean something. She needed all the pain and sacrifices and lost lives to amount to something, and Joel rise to her face. What Joel did is a horribly fucked up inevitable decision, and it would have left people who wanted to hunt him down, and hunt him down they did. Some people argue that Joel's death is out of character. Surrounded by 6 strangers, he wouldn't just give up his name, knowing that he made a ton of enemies. Here is how I see it. It is out of place for the Joel we knew in the first game. That Joel would have just let Abby die, but the Joel from part 2 is a much warmer, caring, and generally better person than that husk of a man. Since he got back to Jackson, he lived 5 years in relative safety, only having to seriously worry about infected. At that time, he lived in comfort, and it made him a far weaker survivalist, but a far better person. Do you want to know what he did in those 5 years? He took up woodworking, he fixed up guitars. He didn't survive in Jackson, he lived, until the default for people became his neighbors, not the hunters or cannibals who shot at him and asked questions never. I think you're right. The Joel we knew was a hardcore survivalist who would not have revealed himself like that. But the Joel we saw in the sequel was a person with a normal life. Though you can argue that the game should have made that much clearer. The intention with Joel's death scene is to get you to hate Abby and her crew. They beat Tommy until he's unconscious, blow off Joel's knee and beat him to death, while also holding down Ellie so she watches her father figure die violently. It is a horribly fucked up way to go. So, you play as Ellie for the 3 days in Seattle, gradually killing more of Abby's crew, until you get to that cliffhanger, in which the game, with some massive set of balls, tells you to wait and forces you to learn more about Abby and the people you fought against, as the game does its best to humanize the group that you fought against for 12 hours. You see their worries, their fears. You see that since Jackson, none of them have exactly been doing well, particularly Mel, who's been avoiding the person who killed Joel. What this 6-hour section does quite well is humanize the group. It gets you to stop seeing them as just pure cartoon evil people and as human beings, shaped by the world just like Joel or Ellie. It, however, mostly fails to get you to like them, with the exception of maybe of Abby, or maybe, and it's a big maybe, Owen. This is primarily due to the fact that you know that almost all of them will die, so it's hard to get attached. Primarily with Abby's section lasting roughly 6 hours, and do not interact with everyone on that crew for long enough. So I genuinely think that the intention is not to get you to like these people, but simply to see their side, see them as humans, and that I do think is done quite well. There are some issues I have with Abby's section. Mel is heavily pregnant, but given that she is rather important for the plot, you do need to spend time with her. But logically, by that point in the story, she is heavily pregnant. So instead of finding some other safe route, you choose to have her literally be out on patrol with Abby and Manny? A heavily pregnant woman going to war? What the fuck? Why not add in a line about Isaac needing Mel in the fob, or needing to take her somewhere else? I can buy that a 6-7 month old can shoot a gun or walk around. I cannot buy that doctors would give Mel leave to go out on patrol, or even Mel herself would want to go on patrol given that she herself is a doctor. Or also, in the Seraphite Island, Yara is shot and seemingly killed by a wolf, but moments later grabs a gun and shoots Isaac dead. None of the soldiers behind him notice the dead's car moving. She doesn't try and speak to Rev, her brother who's crying over her in the few moments before Isaac shows up. This weird resurrection doesn't do anything besides being a last minute save for Rev and Abby, as the soldiers around Isaac just gun her down again. My problem with the story also winds up connecting back to gameplay. You have a plot that heavily revolves around justice at any cost, the dehumanization of the other, and how it all leads into a never-ending cycle of further and further violence until we can't even see where it started. And the moment-to-moment combat is fun as hell in an intense sort of way. Listen, the distance isn't so severe that I feel like I'm playing a game like Just Cause 3 that empowers you and makes you feel like a badass. The combat is intense and oftentimes nail-biting, so it feels akin to something more like John Wick. But it shouldn't be. Despite the few times where the violence and the death of the soldiers shook me, none of these combat encounters made me think about how wrong this whole thing was. Until the Alien Abbey fight scenes, which were the only times I genuinely didn't have fun with the combat in a good way. I didn't want to harm Ellie at all as Abby, but I understood why she wanted to do that. The theater fight and beach fight were the only times that the combat feels like it lives up to the themes and the plot of the game. Because if everything in the game did up to this point worked on you, you want neither of them to kill each other. Otherwise, in every other combat sequence, planting a bomb is really fun, and seeing someone get blown to shreds just gives you a hit of dopamine. The beach fight conveys this harmony in the themes even better, as you don't have the guns or tools you had previously. All you can do is use the rather monotonous melee combat system to keep going. So the game, even more so than the theater fight, forces you to see how far down the quest for justice they have gone. And yet, I still feel like, despite the genuine effort in those fights and in ratcheting up the intensity, the game utterly fails to give a proper answer to these themes. When the credits rolled, all that I could think of as an answer to these themes as provided by the game is humans are violent, we're doomed to repeat cycles of violence, which is such an aggressively nihilistic and bleak perspective on the world and human beings. We are absolutely capable of evil, and it's fine to want to highlight that. But I don't think it's at all fair to leave out the fact that underneath all that the bullshit, we are still capable of compassion and empathy. This is a nitpick, but it's one thing that absolutely angered me throughout, and it's that no one uses their fat fucking mouths to communicate properly. You can get jumped by WRF defectors, and it's not a surprise. You learn through notes from dead WRF soldiers that some people ran off with supplies, and once you stop at a workbench, you get jumped by them. After the first bit of struggle where they say we're not going back, like people unaligned with who you're fighting say, Ellie doesn't say, I'm not a soldier, sorry about that. Or how about the scar section as Ellie? It's revealed pretty quickly that WRF are fighting Seraphites. You tell me it would be impossible for Ellie to speak to one WRF soldier normally, or one Seraphite without making him eat red. You lay out these themes with surprising maturity for a AAA action game, and then not only do you not let me say what I think, You barely provide much of an answer besides murder is bad. The ending particularly is rough. I talked about how the fight scenes show you effortlessly how these two characters have been dragged down, blah blah blah. Rewind the video a bit if you've forgotten. But the narrative build-up seems just perfect for a choice that didn't happen. For once in the entire game, these two deeply traumatized people could have had a talk which began to heal wounds. Period. I think the biggest problem with The Last of Us 2 is that it's a AAA game. Period. And because a AAA game of all else must be action heavy, you can tell a deeply emotional story about fatherhood, about finding a home, taking down a religious cult, about order and personal freedom. You can focus on sci-fi horror, on whatever. It all has to be built around combat and violence, which is fine. But if your story is specifically about how violence is evil and you're a AAA game developer, then your biggest problem will be the fact that you still have to have fun combat and narratively treat the player like a child. I am left coming out of this game sorta liking it. It's a gamble, one that will hit all the right spots for some and hitting none for others. And that's fine, no piece of media is for everyone, nor should it be. But I am empathetic to the people who left the game just hating it. I mean, the first game is an ultimately uplifting story about unconditional love, while this one is a bleak and depressing story about revenge. There is major tonal clash right there. If you haven't played it, I encourage you to. This is a game made by passionate people who, despite the flaws in the story, believe in it. Like I've said hundreds of times on this channel, I will always support games made with passion, and unique games. Last of Us 2, because of the story, falls into that category. Thanks for watching.